She thought she had buried herself deep enough that no one would ever find her. New city, new name on the business license, new life built from nothing but stubbornness and sleepless nights. For 3 years, Amina Brooks convinced herself the past was finished with her. But the past doesn't negotiate. It doesn't send warnings. It simply appears in the form of a black sedan parked across from her office 3 mornings in a row, in the form of an anonymous photograph slipped under her door showing her son at the school gate, and finally, in the form of a man she once loved standing in her doorway at 8 in the morning, looking at her like she was the only thing standing between him and total destruction. She was right to run. She was wrong to think running was enough. If this story already has you gripped, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let's see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The sedan had been there since Monday. Amina noticed it the way she noticed most things, quietly, without expression, while her brain worked 3 steps ahead of whatever her face was doing. She had been carrying a cardboard tray of coffees from the place on Drayton Street, the good one, the one with the peeling paint on the awning and the barista who never got her order wrong. She had turned the corner onto the block where her office sat, second floor of a converted townhouse, Brooks Interiors stenciled in clean gold letters on the frosted glass. And she had seen it. Black sedan, dark windows, engine off. Nobody visible inside but the kind of stillness that meant somebody was absolutely inside. She kept walking, took the stairs up to her office, set the coffee down on Deja's desk, and went directly to the window without turning the lights on. The sedan didn't move. She told herself it was nothing. Savannah had money in it, and money brought security details, and security details sat in black sedans all day watching nothing. She told herself that for 20 minutes before she accepted that she was lying to herself and went about her work. Tuesday it was back. Same spot, same stillness. Wednesday she started parking her car 2 blocks in the other direction and walking a different route. Not because she'd decided anything was wrong, because her body had already decided something was wrong, and her body had better survival instincts than her conscious mind had ever wanted to acknowledge. Wednesday night, she picked Marcus up from her neighbor Miss Della's house at 6:30, same as always. Marcus was 3 years old and built like a small, opinionated boulder. He had strong opinions about which shoes he wore, which cup held his water, and whether Amina was walking fast enough. He was currently of the opinion that she was not walking fast enough, and he communicated this by attempting to drag her by 2 fingers toward the direction of home with the absolute conviction of someone who had no concept of his own size. Marcus, baby, I cannot be dragged. Walk, mama. I am walking. Walk fast. She smiled down at him and walked fast, and for 10 minutes everything was exactly what she had worked very hard to make it. Ordinary, quiet, hers. The evening light in Savannah in early October had that particular quality she still wasn't entirely used to, the way it turned everything amber and unhurried, the way it suggested that nothing could be urgent here. She had chosen this city for exactly that quality. She had chosen it because it felt nothing like Chicago. And Chicago was where she had lost her mind and her heart, and almost her entire sense of self in the span of 18 months. She did not think about Chicago. She thought about the estimate she owed a client by Friday, the meeting with the fabric rep on Thursday morning, the molar Marcus had been pressing with his tongue for 2 days that probably meant a pediatric dentist appointment she couldn't afford to delay. She thought about her accounts receivable and the assistant she needed to hire, but kept postponing because hiring someone meant trusting someone, and trusting someone felt like a door she wasn't ready to open all the way. She did not think about Chicago. Thursday morning, she found the photograph. It had been slipped under the front door of the townhouse sometime before 6 a.m., which meant before the downstairs accountant arrived and before the property manager did his morning walkthrough. It was a standard 4x6 print, the kind you ordered from a pharmacy. No note, no writing on the back. The photograph was of Marcus at his daycare gate. It had been taken from across the street. She could see the angle of it. Whoever had been behind that camera had been standing on the opposite sidewalk, using something with a long lens, and they had caught Marcus mid-sentence, his mouth open, his small hand raised pointing at something she couldn't see, his face caught in that particular expression he wore when he was explaining something very important to someone who wasn't listening carefully enough. The photograph was crisp. It wasn't threatening in any explicit way. There was no X across his face, no words, no attempt at menace, which was somehow worse. An explicit threat meant someone wanted to scare her. This meant someone wanted her to know they could scare her without trying. Amina stood in the downstairs hallway for a long time with the photograph in her hand. She was wearing her work clothes, dark trousers, a deep burgundy blouse, her hair pinned back. She was supposed to be upstairs making calls. She stood in the hallway instead and breathed through her nose and made herself think clearly. The first thing she did was call Marcus's daycare and tell them nobody was authorized to release him except herself, that she would be showing identification every single time, and that any unfamiliar adults expressing interest in any of the children needed to be reported immediately. The woman who answered, a soft, patient woman named Cora, didn't ask questions. She had the tone of someone who understood that sometimes mothers called with this exact voice for reasons that didn't need explaining. The second thing Amina did was go upstairs, unlock the small fireproof box she kept in the bottom drawer of her desk behind the hanging files, and take out the phone. It was an old iPhone, 2 generations back. Its case cracked at the corner from a fall she remembered happening during a different version of her life. She had kept it charged out of habit she couldn't entirely explain to herself. The phone still held 114 photographs, 12 voicemails, a dozen text conversations she had read so many times she could recite them, and one image stored in a separate encrypted folder behind a 6-digit code she had never shared with anyone. She stared at the locked phone for a moment without turning it on. Then she put it back in the box and locked the drawer and sat at her desk and pressed both palms flat against the surface and breathed. She had known, somewhere in the place that never fully went to sleep, that this day was possible. She had structured her entire life for the last 3 years around making it improbable. She had been careful in ways that cost her. No social media, no industry profiles beyond the bare professional minimum, a business registered under a holding company her lawyer had set up with deliberate distance. She had made friends slowly and told them very little. She had dated nobody, trusted almost nobody, and spent a significant portion of every week being grateful for what she had while quietly watching for anything that shouldn't be there. The sedan had been there since Monday. She picked up her phone, her current phone, the real one, and was 3 digits into a number she hadn't dialed in 2 years when the downstairs door opened. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Steady, unhurried. One person. Someone who knew which step creaked because they stepped over it. She had told 2 people about that step. One of them was Deja, who wasn't due in for another 40 minutes, and Deja's footsteps were faster and lighter, and usually accompanied by the sound of her iced coffee cup hitting the railing. These footsteps were none of those things. Amina put the phone down on her desk. She did not reach for anything else because there was nothing else to reach for, and because she had made a series of choices years ago that had led to this moment, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She straightened in her chair. She made sure her face was doing what she needed it to do, which was nothing, absolutely nothing. The door opened. Kang Tae-hyun looked exactly the same and completely different in the way that people do when 3 years have done serious work on them. The same height, just over 6 feet, which she had always noticed more than she admitted. The same jaw, the same particular quality of stillness that had always made rooms orient themselves around him rather than the other way around. His hair was shorter than she remembered. There was something around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a compression. The look of someone who had spent a long time not sleeping well. He was wearing a charcoal suit with no tie. He looked like he had been on a plane within the last 12 hours, which he probably had. He looked at her across the 12 feet of office space between them with an expression she recognized from the category of expressions that meant he had already thought through multiple versions of this conversation, and none of them had gone easily. "Amina," he said. Just that. Her name in his voice with the particular weight he had always given it, like it was something worth saying carefully. She did not stand up. "You need to tell me how you found me." "I'll tell you everything." He came in 2 steps and stopped. "But I need you to understand something first. I did not come here by choice. I came here because Baek Sungjae found you approximately 6 days before I did, and if I hadn't come, someone else would have. Someone he sent." Amina felt the floor do nothing beneath her feet. She was grateful for that. "Sungjae?" "Yes." "He's been with your family for 22 years. Yes." Something moved through Tae-hyun's expression. "That's the problem." She looked at him for a long moment. The sedan, the photograph, the specific surgical message of a child captured at a gate. She thought about the box in the bottom drawer and the phone inside it, and the image locked behind 6 digits that she had photographed on a Tuesday afternoon 3.5 years ago because something in her gut had told her the number didn't match, and the paper trail was wrong, and she should document it before somebody made it disappear. She had never known precisely what she'd photographed. She had suspected. She had not wanted to be right. The photograph, she said. It wasn't a question. The photograph, he confirmed. Amina looked at the surface of her desk. There was a pencil there, a site visit notebook, a coffee she hadn't touched. Very ordinary things. She looked at them the way you looked at ordinary things when ordinary had just left the building. You should close the door, she said. 3.5 years earlier, Amina Brooks had not been looking for a new job. She had been 7 months into a position with a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago's River North, doing the work she was always the best person in any room to do. The work of making a powerful, disorganized man's professional life function at the level it was supposed to function at. She was good at this. She was good at it in the specific way that required a particular combination of intelligence, discretion, and a tolerance for difficult personalities that she had developed early and refined over years. She was also good at knowing when a situation had peaked and when the exit was the right call. The exit from the logistics firm came in the form of an HR complaint she filed that went nowhere, and a job offer that arrived 2 weeks later from a recruiter she'd never spoken with, presenting an opportunity she had never considered. Personal executive secretary to the CEO of Kang Holdings, the American division of a Korean-based multinational with a portfolio running from real estate to logistics to financial services. The salary was not modest. The expectations were not modest either. The recruiter sent her a 12-page briefing document about the position before the first interview and told her, with the particular directness of someone who had seen many people fail this audition, that the CEO kept very specific standards and that most candidates didn't last the screening process. Amina had read the briefing document twice, gone to the first interview in a suit she'd had tailored the previous winter, and answered every question with the calm precision of someone who understood exactly what she was offering and expected to be compensated accordingly. She did not shrink. She did not perform enthusiasm she didn't feel. She told the hiring panel with complete composure that she required a specific salary range, specific boundaries around her hours, and clarity about the actual scope of responsibilities before she would commit to a second round. There had been a pause after she said this. Then the woman running the panel, a composed Korean-American named Park Ji-yeon, who Amina later understood was Tae-hyun's chief of staff, had written something down and told her she'd hear back within 48 hours. She heard back in 6. Tae-hyun had interviewed her himself, which was not standard. He had come into the conference room without a jacket, which was not standard either, and he had looked at her resume for approximately 90 seconds before setting it down and asking her a question that had nothing to do with the resume. If you discovered something irregular in a document I asked you to file, he said, what would you do? Amina had looked at him. He was younger than she'd expected, early 30s, the kind of compose that came from practice rather than ease. She had taken a moment to consider whether this was a test question or a real one and decided it didn't matter because her answer was the same either way. I would document what I found, note the date and context, and bring it to your attention directly. And if the response I received was inadequate, I would determine whether my legal obligations required me to go further. He had looked at her for a long moment after that. Most people say they'd flag it internally and trust the process. Most people want to keep their jobs. You don't? I want a job I can keep while still sleeping at night, she said. Those aren't always the same thing. He had hired her on the spot, which she learned later was also not standard. She had started the following Monday. What nobody told her, what the briefing document and the 12-page overview and Park Ji-yeon's meticulous orientation had not covered, was that Kang Holdings' legitimacy was scaffolding. It was excellent scaffolding, professionally constructed, legally defensible from every angle that the right attorneys had thought to cover. It was also scaffolding. Underneath it, running through the financial architecture of the company, the way rebar ran through concrete, was the actual structure, the movement of money that had nothing to do with real estate or logistics, the relationships with people whose names never appeared in any filing, the particular quality of deference that surrounded Tae-hyun in certain meetings that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchy. Amina had understood this within about 3 weeks. She had filed this understanding alongside several other things she understood and did not speak aloud, because she was not naive and because the work itself was real, and she was good at it, and because Tae-hyun, whatever else he was, ran a tight, professional operation that treated her with a respect she found she hadn't realized she'd been missing elsewhere. She told herself it was purely professional. For a long time, she almost convinced herself. The thing about working in close proximity to someone who was genuinely brilliant at what they did even if what they did existed in multiple registers, only some of them legal, was that you learned them. Not the way you learned a colleague, the way you learned a room, the particular temperatures and pressures of it, the places where the architecture was under stress. Taehyun worked 18-hour days and took no real days off, and ate badly and didn't sleep enough, and ran himself on will and coffee and the particular driven fury of someone who had never in his life been given the option to stop. He was demanding of everyone around him, including himself, and he held the work to a standard that she respected even when it exhausted her. He made decisions quickly, and with a certainty that she had gradually come to understand was not arrogance but training. Decisions had been made around him, and on his behalf his entire life, and he had learned to make them fast because slow meant someone else made them first. He noticed things. This was the part that caught her. He noticed that she took her coffee a specific way and made sure it was prepared that way without making a thing of it. He noticed when she was running on less sleep and adjusted the morning schedule without comment. He noticed the particular way she engaged with certain clients, her tendency toward directness that some people found abrasive and that he apparently found efficient, and he started putting her in rooms he normally kept her out of. He noticed her. She noticed him noticing. It started with working dinners that ran long and had too much wine, and contained conversations that kept sliding into territory that had nothing to do with the quarterly reports. It continued with a morning in March when she arrived to find he had cleared an entire afternoon she'd had filled with calls and told her they were going to look at a property in Wicker Park that the real estate division was considering, and he wanted her read on the neighborhood demographics. They had walked through empty rooms in a building that smelled like old wood and new paint, and he had listened to everything she said with the particular attention that she was not used to receiving from people who paid her salary, and at some point the space between them had stopped being professional space and started being something that neither of them named for another 3 weeks. She knew what he was. She knew what he was connected to. She had told herself twice that she was going to make a quiet exit before it became something she couldn't exit from, and both times something, his directness, his intelligence, the particular way he looked at her like she was not an inconvenience to be managed, had stopped her. The first time he kissed her, they were standing in the parking structure of the Chicago office at 11 p.m. on a Thursday after a client meeting that had run 6 hours. She had said something that made him laugh, a real laugh, not the controlled social version. And he had looked at her for a long moment with an expression she couldn't quite map, and then he had kissed her without asking, which she should have objected to and didn't. Because the truth was, she'd been waiting for it long enough that when it finally happened, her body's response skipped past surprise and went directly to relief. They were careful. That was what she told herself. They were careful and it was contained and it was separate from the work, which remained professional and maintained its standards and did not become the kind of situation where anyone could credibly suggest her judgment was compromised. She believed this for 7 months. She was wrong for approximately 4 of them. The document came across her desk on a Tuesday in September, tucked inside a standard internal audit packet she was supposed to review and forward. Most of what she reviewed every day was real in the legitimate sense. Actual business activity, actual financial flows, the kind of paper that would survive scrutiny. This document wasn't that. She knew it wasn't that before she finished reading the first page, the way you knew certain things with your skin before your brain caught up. The numbers were wrong. Not wrong in the way of errors. Wrong in the specific way of numbers that had been made to look right with enough layers between origin and destination that the average reviewer would pass it without slowing down. She was not the average reviewer. She sat at her desk for 45 minutes with the document in front of her. She took 3 photographs of it with her personal phone, the old one, the cracked one, ensuring the file number and date stamp were visible in every frame. She encrypted the photos behind a code she chose in the moment and did not write down. She forwarded the audit packet without noting anything irregular, which was the first decision she had made in this job that she wasn't entirely comfortable with. She told herself she'd bring it to Taehyun directly. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment. She was still waiting for the right moment 10 days later when she came back from a client lunch early and heard his voice through the partially open door of his private office. He was on the phone. She could tell from the register of the conversation that it was his father, old Kang Cheol-soo, whose presence in the company's structure was never explicitly named, but whose authority ran through everything like weather. She understood Korean at a functional level, not fluently, but enough. She stood in the anteroom with her coat still on her arm and listened to the half of a conversation she could hear. "The Chicago problem," he said at one point, in Korean, with the specific inflection of someone referring to something that needed to be managed or removed. She didn't hear everything. She didn't need to. She understood the shape of what she was hearing. She had understood the shape of it for months and chosen not to look at it directly. She walked to her desk and sat down and did not cry, because she had not become the person she was by crying over things she could have predicted. She sat at her desk for a long time and thought about the photographs on her phone and about the conversation she had just partially overheard and about the appointment she had been postponing for 2 weeks because she wasn't ready to know the answer. The next morning, she called the doctor's office. 2 days later, she had an answer that changed everything. She did not tell Tae-hyun. She did not tell anyone. She went home that evening and sat in her apartment and did the specific math of her situation with the cold precision of someone who understood that sentiment was not a viable planning tool. She was pregnant. She was sleeping with a man whose family operated a criminal organization. She had in her possession encrypted photographic evidence of financial fraud inside that organization. She had heard him describe her. At least, she was almost certain she had heard him describe her as a problem to be solved. She spent one night allowing herself to feel all of this. The next morning, she made a list. She resigned via email. She gave no notice period. She cited personal reasons and provided no further detail and thanked the company for the opportunity in language that was professional and left no room for follow-up. She packed what mattered into 2 bags. She was out of her apartment by end of day Friday. She had done enough research in the previous 72 hours to know that Savannah had a growing design sector, a reasonable cost of living, and zero connection to anything she needed to be connected to anymore. She had built something real from nothing, and she had not looked back. Until Thursday morning, when the photograph of her son appeared under the door. Tae-hyun sat in the chair across from her desk, and did not relax into it the way people usually sat when they were in chairs. He sat in it the way he did everything. With a controlled economy, his forearms on his knees, his eyes on her face. He had accepted the coffee she poured without comment. He hadn't touched it. "How long has Sung-jae known?" she asked. "We believe he's had a general location for 4 to 6 weeks. The specific address..." Tae-hyun paused. "Longer than I'd like. How did he find me?" A facial recognition sweep through property records. His jaw was tight. "There are tools now that your cover would have been invisible to 3 years ago. It isn't a failure of what you built. He had resources and time." She absorbed this. "And you?" "I had a different trail." He looked at her steadily. "I wasn't looking for you until I understood he was." "That's supposed to make me feel better." "No," he said. "It's supposed to be accurate." She set her coffee down. Outside the window, Savannah went about its morning. A trolley moved somewhere below. The light was doing its amber thing again. She found herself resenting it briefly, the city's refusal to register that anything had changed. "The photograph I took," she said. "You know about it." "I know you photographed something during the September audit. I didn't know what until recently." He leaned forward slightly. "Amina, I need to ask you directly. Do you still have it?" "What is it?" she asked instead of answering. "What did I actually photograph?" Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Something heavier. The original transaction record from a transfer Baek Sung-jae executed in August of that year. At that point, we believed it was a legitimate internal movement of funds between 2 holding structures. He stopped. "It wasn't. He had been diverting money for years. We now estimate north of 40 million, possibly significantly more, through a layered structure that he built from inside our organization. The document you photographed predates the versions currently in our records by several months, meaning he replaced it. Meaning he replaced it after it passed your desk, which means the copy you have is the only surviving version of the original." The room was very quiet. She could hear the building settle somewhere, the small sounds of an old structure adjusting. "There's more," he said. She waited. "Your mother." He said it carefully, the way you said something when you understood it was going to land like a stone in still water. "Your biological mother, Diane Brooks. She died 29 years ago. The official record is a hit and run outside of Detroit." Amina went very still. "I know how my mother died. She was working for the Kang organization at that time. Not in the way you were. She was a financial analyst, a contract position. She found the same pattern, an earlier version of the same architecture that Sung-jae built." He met her eyes. "She was going to take it externally, to regulators. She told someone inside the organization she trusted. That person was Baek Sung-jae." The silence that followed was different from the previous silence. It had a different weight. "We found this how?" she said finally. "My father." The words came with something attached to them, something like old damage. 2 months ago, he told me. He had known for years that Sung-jae had ordered it. He chose at the time to protect the organization rather than act. Tae-hyun looked at his hands for a moment. He is not a man who apologizes, but he told me. Amina stood up. She didn't have a destination in mind, she just needed to not be sitting down. She walked to the window and looked at the street below. A woman was walking a large dog. 2 men were arguing mildly over a parking space. The sedan was gone from its spot across the street, but she noted its absence with the specific attention of someone who understood that absence was not the same as gone. Her mother. She had been 4 years old when Diane Brooks died. She had grown up with the contours of that absence the way you grew up with any structural feature of a house, not always thinking about it, but always navigating around it, always aware at some level of the shape it made. She had thought about her mother's death in the abstract terms of grief and in the practical terms of what it had made of her childhood, which had been shuffled through a succession of relatives, some kind, some not. She had never had a reason to think about it in any other terms. She turned away from the window. "The photograph on my phone," she said, "is the only surviving original document of a transaction that links Baek Sung-jae to $40 million in theft from your family, and possibly to my mother's murder." "Yes. And he knows I have it. He knows you photographed something. He may not know precisely what, but he knows you were there and he knows you kept the phone." Tae-hyun stood now too. He will not stop. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to trust me long enough to—" "That's not a specific answer." He stopped. The old Tae-hyun would have pushed through the interruption. This one absorbed it. "I need the photograph. With it, I have everything I need to bring Sung-jae down completely, inside the organization and legally. My attorneys have been in contact with a federal task force for the last 6 weeks. This is the missing piece." Amina looked at him. She thought about 3 years of building something from the ground up. She thought about a fireproof box in the bottom drawer of her desk. She thought about a small boy with a pointed finger and an expression of absolute conviction about things that deserved attention. "I give you the photograph," she said, "and your organization handles it, your attorneys, your process, your timeline." "That's what I'm proposing." "No," she said. "That's not what's happening." She crossed her arms. "If that photograph goes anywhere, it goes simultaneously to your legal team, to federal investigators directly, not through your attorneys as a filter, and to at least 2 independent journalists with the source documents to contextualize it. The evidence doesn't go into any room where your family is the only one holding the door." His jaw moved. She watched him think through it. "That implicates my organization in areas that I know what it implicates." Amina Tae-hyun. She said his name the same way he'd said hers, with the specific weight of it. "I'm not negotiating. Those are conditions. If the answer is no, this conversation is over, and I deal with this another way." The window light shifted. Somewhere below, the trolley bell rang once. He looked at her for a long time. She had forgotten. Or maybe she had made herself forget the particular quality of his attention when he was being honest rather than strategic. It was different from his default operating mode. It was quieter. "All right," he said. "I need it in writing. Your signature and your attorney's." "You'll have it by this afternoon." She nodded. She uncrossed her arms. She went to the desk and opened the bottom drawer. The box was where it always was. She was unlocking it when her own phone buzzed on the desk surface. She picked it up. Unknown number, local area code. She answered because something about this morning had moved her past the point of ignoring unknown numbers. The voice on the other end was one she didn't recognize, male, accent she couldn't immediately place, very calm. "Ms. Brooks," it said, "Mr. Baek suggests you consider carefully whether you want to make decisions this morning that can't be undone. He knows about your son's school. He knows about the woman who watches him in the evenings. He knows you have a 9:30 meeting on Thursday that requires you to drive on a specific route." A pause. "This is a courtesy call, that's all." The line disconnected. Amina lowered the phone. Her hand was not shaking. She noted this as a physiological fact with the remote part of her brain that remained observational under extreme pressure. Her hand was not shaking. Everything else was very loud and very still at the same time. She looked at Tae-hyun. He had seen her face change. He hadn't heard the call. "What was that?" She set the phone down on the desk. She thought about Marcus at Miss Della's this morning, still in his pajamas when she left, insisting with absolute authority that the cereal he wanted was the one on the top shelf. She thought about what it felt like to have something that mattered enough to threaten. "We need to move faster than this afternoon," she said. He pulled his own phone out. "Tell me," she told him. She watched his face during it. The controlled stillness that wasn't calm, but was the compressed version of something that had nowhere to go yet. When she finished, he was already dialing. "Jiyeon," he said when the call connected, in Korean, and then a string of instructions she mostly followed and that mostly confirmed everything she had already concluded about how little time they had. She opened the fireproof box. The old phone was exactly as she had left it. Cracked case, 20% battery remaining from whenever she had last charged it. She held it for a moment. 3.5 years. The evidence on this phone, if it was what Tae-hyun said it was, had already cost her mother's life before Amina was old enough to understand the word cost. It had been sitting in a locked box in her desk through every ordinary Tuesday and every school pickup, and every morning she poured coffee and told herself the past was finished with her. She looked at the phone. Then she looked at Tae-hyun, who had finished his call and was watching her with the expression she had learned to read years ago as the one that meant he was saying something with his eyes that he hadn't yet found the right language for. "I need to get Marcus first," she said, "before I do anything else. I need him somewhere safe, and I need to know who's watching him." "I have people. Your people," she said. "Not yet. I need someone I trust." His expression shifted, not offense, something more complicated. "I understand." She picked up her real phone and called Miss Della. 4 rings, 5. She was composing the voicemail in her head when the line connected, and Miss Della's voice came through, warm and slightly out of breath, saying she'd just been in the garden. And yes, Marcus was there. He'd been brought over 20 minutes ago by... Amina stopped listening to the words and started listening to what was underneath them. 20 minutes ago by... "Miss Della," she said, very carefully. "Who brought him?" A pause. Miss Della's voice slightly confused, slightly apologetic. "The man said he was your cousin, sweetheart. He had a picture on his phone of the two of you together. He seemed like he knew you." Amina was already moving toward the door. She was halfway down the stairs before she registered that Tae-hyun was right behind her, his hand on her shoulder, not to slow her down, but because he had heard her voice on the call and understood what it meant without needing explanation. "Address," he said. She gave it to him while she ran. Miss Della's house was 4 blocks away. Amina covered those 4 blocks in under 3 minutes, which she was aware of in the removed statistical way that her brain sometimes processed physical information when the rest of it was occupied with something louder. She was aware of the pavement under her shoes, the particular October air of Savannah that smelled like cut grass and exhaust, and the faint sweetness of something blooming she had never learned the name of, and the sound of Tae-hyun's footsteps behind her, steady and close, not outpacing her. Miss Della's was a yellow house on a street of yellow and white houses, distinguishable by the wind chimes on the porch and the ceramic frog beside the front step that Marcus had named Gerald and greeted personally every morning. The front door was open behind the screen. Amina went through the screen door without knocking. Miss Della was in the front room, seated in her floral armchair with the expression of someone who had just understood that she'd made a mistake. She was a woman in her mid-60s, soft-spoken, the kind of neighbor Amina had chosen with the same care she chose everything in her Savannah life. Deliberately, based on evidence, with one eye always on the exit. She had never given Amina a reason to doubt her. She was looking at Amina now with hands folded in her lap and worry written plainly across her face. Marcus was on the floor with a set of stacking rings he'd had since before he could walk. He looked up when Amina came in. "Mama." The relief of seeing him was physical, a release somewhere in her chest wall that she didn't have time to sit with. She crossed the room and crouched down and put her hands on him, both hands, his shoulders, his face, checking in the fast automatic way of a parent who needed to know he was whole. He was whole. He smelled like breakfast cereal and the faintly medicinal scent of sunscreen that Miss Della applied to every child in her care, regardless of weather. "Hi, baby," she said. Her voice was level. "Gerald has a crack," Marcus told her, with the gravity of someone reporting structural damage. "We'll look at Gerald later." She stood. She looked at Miss Della. "Tell me exactly what the man looked like." Miss Della pressed her hands together. "Amina, I am so sorry. He had a photograph. On his phone. It looked like you. It looked recent. What did he look like?" "Korean, young, maybe 30, very polite." She paused. "He had a small scar, here." She touched below her left ear. He said he was your cousin from your mother's side, that there was a family situation and you'd asked him to. Did he come inside? No, he knocked. Marcus was on the porch with me, and the boy just. He asked for Marcus by name, and Marcus went to him like he knew him. You know how he does with strangers? I should have. Did he touch Marcus? He shook his hand. Miss Della's voice had gone thin. He shook his hand and he said something in, I don't know what language, and Marcus laughed. And then he said he'd made a mistake, that you'd actually asked him to leave Marcus here, and he gave me his card in case you needed to reach him, and he left. Amina held her hand out. Miss Della reached into the pocket of her cardigan and produced a card, plain white, nothing on it but a phone number, no name, no logo. Taehyun had come in behind her. Amina was aware of the moment Miss Della registered his presence, the slight adjustment in posture, the reassessment happening behind polite eyes. He was standing in the doorway reading the room without moving, which was something Amina recognized as a trained behavior, the habit of a man who never entered a space without first understanding it. She passed him the card without looking at him. He looked at it. Something moved across his face. I know this number. Who is it? One of Sung Jae's men, a contractor he uses for soft pressure situations. He folded the card and pocketed it. He wasn't here to take Marcus. He was here to show you he could. Amina turned back to Miss Della. Pack him a bag. Enough for 3 days. His bear, the rings, the cup with the blue lid. Don't put his name on anything. She picked Marcus up off the floor, rings and all. He allowed this with the resigned dignity of a child who had learned that sometimes the stacking rings had to come with. I'll explain everything when I can. I'm sorry I brought this near you. Miss Della was already moving toward the back of the house. Don't you apologize to me. You just keep that boy safe. They were back on the street 60 seconds later. Marcus on Amina's hip, a canvas bag over her shoulder. Taehyun one step to her left, doing the particular thing he'd always done in uncertain environments, keeping himself positioned between her and the street without making a performance of it. She had noticed this about him years ago. She noticed it now with the specific irritation of someone who didn't want to notice anything generous about him at this particular moment. I need to call Deja, she said. Your assistant. She comes in at 9:30. She'll be at the office. If they're watching the building, call her now. Tell her the office is closed today and not to come in. Don't explain. Amina was already dialing. Deja picked up on the second ring, and Amina delivered the instruction in the flat, professional tone she reserved for situations requiring compliance without questions. Deja, to her credit, asked none. She was 26 years old and perceptive and had worked for Amina for long enough to understand that certain instructions came without footnotes. What about the Henderson walkthrough at 2? Deja asked. Reschedule. They're not going to like Deja. Rescheduling, Deja said, and hung up. Marcus had been looking at Taehyun from the vantage point of Amina's hip with the focused, unself-conscious assessment that small children conducted on adults they hadn't categorized yet. Taehyun became aware of this scrutiny and looked back at Marcus with an expression Amina didn't know how to read. Not the controlled professional face, not the operational focus. Something that had no category in her existing library of his expressions. He yours? Marcus said, pointing at Taehyun with a directness that Amina recognized as a personality trait she had not successfully socialized out of him. Marcus? It's a reasonable question, Taehyun said, in English, to Marcus. He looked at him without crouching down to make it performatively gentle, which Amina noted. We know each other, yes. Marcus considered this. You're tall, he decided, and returned to examining his remaining stacking ring with the subject evidently settled. Taehyun looked at Amina. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. There was too much in the available space between them to say anything, and the street was not the place for it regardless. Where are we going? She said instead. I have a property on the south side, clean, not registered to anything connected to the organization. My assistant secured it 2 days ago when I confirmed your location. He paused, which was unusual for him. It isn't meant to feel like a situation you've been put into. You can say no. I need somewhere safe for him, she said. That's the only criteria right now. She started walking. He fell in beside her. The property was a rented house on a quiet street near Forsyth Park, a 2-story with a deep porch and a yard that backed up against a fence. Taehyun's assistant, a young man named Seo, who had the perpetual expression of someone running 6 tasks simultaneously, was already there when they arrived, along with a woman in her 40s who Tae-hyun introduced as Yoon, which Amina understood was not her actual name. Yoon had the build and the specific type of watchfulness that told Amina she was not administrative staff. She stays with Marcus, Tae-hyun said. She's not going to let anything happen to him. I don't know her. You don't know my dentist either, but you trust her to put things in your son's mouth. Amina looked at him. That's not... I know it's not the same thing, he said. I know, but I need you to trust me on this one thing, right now, so we can move. Marcus had already decided to show Yoon the stacking ring situation. Yoon was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, engaging with this information with what appeared to be genuine seriousness. Amina watched this for a moment. Then she turned to Tae-hyun. I want to talk to you alone. He followed her to the kitchen, which was clean and anonymous and smelled of fresh paint and nothing personal. She set her bag on the table. She turned to face him with her arms crossed and her back straight, and the specific internal arrangement she had developed over years of difficult conversations. Everything present, nothing soft. Sung-jae knew about the document, she said, from the beginning. You told me he found me 6 days before you did. That's not a coincidence with a 6-week window. He had a reason to move when he moved. Tae-hyun leaned against the counter. Yes. What changed 6 weeks ago? A pause. I started asking questions. She waited. I told you my father came to me 2 months ago and told me about Sung-jae and your mother. What I didn't tell you is that I had already begun an internal audit of Sung-jae's financial work going back 15 years. I did it quietly, without telling him, but he has people inside our accounting structure. He would have known within days that someone was looking. So your investigation is what put a target on Marcus? The words landed. She watched them land. His jaw tightened. Indirectly, he said. There's no indirect here. You started pulling a thread and Sung-jae panicked, and the first thing he did was find leverage. And leverage meant my son. Her voice was level, which was a significant effort. You came here to save me, Tae-hyun. I understand that. I'm telling you clearly that the situation you came to save me from was partially created by your decision to act without thinking about the radius. He didn't argue with this. She almost wished he had. The absence of argument was harder to stay angry at. He looked at her with the honesty she remembered from the specific version of him that appeared when he stopped performing competence and actually acknowledged the weight of a situation. You're right, he said. I made a choice that had consequences for your life that you didn't consent to. I did it because I thought speed mattered more than caution. I was wrong about the order of those things. I'm not looking for an apology. I know. I'm giving you an accurate account because I think you deserve one. She uncrossed her arms. She pressed her fingers against the surface of the kitchen table and looked at it. The table was a rental table, generic, meant to be nothing to anyone. She had spent 3 years surrounded by things she chose carefully. The particular velvet of her office chair, the print above her desk, the exact shade she'd painted Marcus's room after 2 weeks of sampling. She had built a life out of intentional choices, and now she was standing in a kitchen that belonged to no one, trying to figure out what her next intentional choice was. Tell me what we need to do, she said. The photograph has to be transmitted before Sung-jae acts. Not delivered. Transmitted, digitally, simultaneously to all 3 recipients you named. The moment it moves, he loses leverage because suppressing it becomes impossible. The power he has right now is the power of it staying still. What stops him from moving against Marcus before we can transmit? The knowledge that if he does, he guarantees my organization turns completely against him. Right now, he has allies inside who believe his story that the investigation is politically motivated. If he harms a child, he stopped. Even men with limited ethics have limits. That's not a guarantee. No, it's a probability. He looked at her steadily. I won't offer you guarantees I don't have. I'll tell you the probability is high, and the alternative is sitting still while he gets more organized. She picked up her bag. She reached inside and brought out the old phone. She set it on the table between them. The cracked case, the blank screen, all that compressed history sitting in a rectangle of glass and aluminum on a rental table in a safe house in Savannah. I need to charge it, she said. Seo appeared in the kitchen doorway, produced a charging cable that fit without being asked, and retreated again. Amina plugged it in. She watched the battery icon appear on the screen, the thin red line of a nearly depleted thing beginning to refill. When it powers up, she said, I enter the code. Only me. The file transfers to your attorney, to the federal task force contact. I want the name and badge number before we do this. And to the journalists. 2 separate publications, not affiliated. I have names. I want to vet them myself. His expression moved towards something that in another context might have been amusement. It was a very small movement. Of course you do. I'm not. She stopped. I'm not trying to be difficult. You're not being difficult. You're being the only person in this situation thinking about what happens after. She didn't respond to that. She was watching the phone charge and thinking about her mother, which was a thought she normally processed in small, manageable increments. She was not currently doing that. She was thinking about a woman she had known only as an absence, a woman who had sat in front of a document very much like the one Amina had photographed, and made a decision to do something about it, and what had happened to her because of that decision. She was thinking about what it meant that the architecture of that betrayal had survived 30 years, had lain dormant inside the Kang organization like something buried and waiting until a different woman sat in front of a different version of the same document. Did she know? Amina asked. My mother. Did she know what Sungjae was? What it meant? According to my father's account, yes. She understood the full picture. She went forward anyway. He let her die for it. Yes. She absorbed this. It didn't feel like revelation exactly. It felt like a shape she had always half seen finally turning to show its full face. Your father is going to have to answer for that, she said. Not to me, to investigators. Whatever deal he thinks he's making by cooperating with your legal strategy, it doesn't include bearing that. Tae-hyun was quiet for a moment. I know. Does he know? Another pause, longer this time. He will. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up. Deja, texting. There's a man outside the office, been there 20 minutes, not moving. Do I call police? She turned the screen to Tae-hyun. He read it and reached for his own phone immediately. Seo, he said when it connected. Get someone to the office address. Observation only until I say otherwise. He rattled off the address of her townhouse from memory, which meant he had done enough research before arriving to know it, which she filed away in the part of her brain that was keeping a running inventory of what she didn't know yet about the situation. She texted Deja back, Do not go near the office, stay where you are and send me your location. Deja's location came through 30 seconds later, a coffee shop 4 blocks from the office. Amina exhaled. The old phone on the table screen lit up. The battery had enough. She entered the code. The photograph folder opened. 3 images. The same document from 3 slightly different angles. Date stamp September 14th, 3.5 years ago. The file number visible in the upper right corner of the document, the figures clearly legible. The shell company name running along the bottom in standard audit typeface. She had not looked at these images since the night she packed her bags. Looking at them now, she understood with the clear-eyed certainty of someone who had spent years around financial documentation exactly what she had stumbled onto. It was not complex when you saw it whole. That was the thing about certain kinds of fraud. The sophistication was in the layers around it, not in the thing itself. Strip the layers and it was simply theft, clean and direct, wearing the borrowed credibility of a legitimate organization's infrastructure. She turned the phone so Tae-hyun could see the screen. He looked at the images for a long time without speaking. His face did very little, which she had learned to read as the sign that something significant was happening underneath. That's enough, he said finally, quietly, more to himself than to her. That's everything. You're sure? The file number, the date, the originating account. He looked up. He can't explain this away. There's no version of this document that he can produce that predates these photographs. He met her eyes. It's enough to finish him. She looked at the phone in her hand. 3 photographs of a piece of paper. Her mother's life. Marcus's school gate. 3 years of building something quiet and hers from the ground up. The weight of all of it was not lost on her, but she had learned early that weight was not a reason to put something down. Sometimes weight was just the cost of carrying something important. Send me your attorney's contact, the federal agent's name and number, the journalist's. She stood. I'll transmit tonight. There are logistics. Tonight, she said. I'm not waiting longer. Every hour we wait is an hour Sungjae has to change the variables. He looked at her. You understand that once this moves, there's no taking it back. Whatever exposure it creates, for my family, for the organization, for everything connected to it, it doesn't stop. I know, including things that might come back to you. Your presence at Kang Holdings, your relationship with... I know, she said again, harder. He stopped. She looked at him with everything she had, all 3 years of Savannah, all the months in Chicago that preceded it, the specific history of two people who had been in the same room with something real and failed to protect it from the world around them. She looked at him with all of it, and she didn't blink. "I am not afraid of what comes out," she said. "I built a clean life. Let it come out." He held her gaze for a moment, and then he nodded, a single, clean movement. She was turning toward the living room to check on Marcus when Seo came through the kitchen door fast, without his usual diffident knock. His face had changed. He was holding his phone out toward Tae-hyun, with the screen facing forward, and whatever was on it made Tae-hyun's entire posture shift in the half-second it took him to read it. "What?" Amina said. Tae-hyun looked at Seo. Then he looked at Amina. "Sung-jae is in Savannah," he said. "He landed 40 minutes ago, and he's not alone. He brought Kang Chol-soo with him." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. His father. The old boss himself. In her city. Amina felt the temperature of the room change the way rooms changed when the actual weight of a situation finally settled fully onto the floor. "Your father knew," she said. It was not a question. It was the only sentence that made sense of the information. "He knew Sung-jae was coming here. He came with him." Tae-hyun said nothing, which was the answer. She looked at him, at the man who had told her his father had confessed, had cooperated, had chosen honesty after decades of choosing organization. And she watched him understand in real time what she had already understood. That the version of his father he had described to her this morning had either not been entirely true or had changed between the telling and this moment, and that either way the ground they had been standing on had just shifted under their feet without warning. Tae-hyun's silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. 4 seconds of a man she had watched make fast decisions for 18 months, standing completely still with the particular quality of stillness that meant the internal machinery had jammed. Then he said, "I need to call him." "Don't!" She said it fast, flat, with the certainty of instinct rather than logic. "If he came with Sung-jae, calling him tells Sung-jae we know they've landed. We lose the only advantage we have right now, which is that they don't know exactly what we've decided to do." Tae-hyun looked at her. The machinery had unjammed. She could see it. The shift from reaction back to calculation, the compression of whatever he was feeling about his father into a space small enough to function around. "All right," he said. "How long before they can find this address?" He looked at Seo. Seo said, "If Sung-jae has local resources already activated, and the call to your phone this morning suggests he does, maybe 2 hours, maybe less. Then we have less than 2 hours." She went to the living room doorway. Marcus was building something with Yoon using the stacking rings and 2 couch cushions, a construction project that appeared to have significant structural ambitions. He looked up at Amina with the easy confidence of a child who had decided the situation was fine because the adults seemed fine. She made her face do fine. "Yoon," the woman looked up. "Can you take him upstairs? There are books in the bag." Yoon stood, offered Marcus a hand, and said something about a story. Marcus went with her, carrying Gerald the ceramic frog's spiritual successor, the stacking ring, with appropriate ceremony. Amina came back to the kitchen. "The transmissions," she said. "Walk me through exactly how we do this, step by step, right now. I want it done in the next 30 minutes. It took 47 minutes, not 30, because the federal contact, an agent named Reyes with the particular tone of someone who had been in the middle of something else and was now recalibrating his entire afternoon, required a verification call that ran longer than expected. Amina sat at the kitchen table with the old phone in front of her and her current phone at her ear, and she answered Reyes's questions with the precise, economical accuracy of someone who had been thinking about how to have this conversation for 3 years without knowing it. He asked how she had come to possess the document. She told him. He asked about her relationship to the organization. She told him that too, without softening the parts that didn't reflect well on her own judgment. He asked if she understood that cooperating put her in a specific legal position that he strongly recommended she discuss with independent counsel before proceeding. "I have my own attorney," she said. "She's been on standby since this morning." There was a pause. "You made a call to independent counsel before contacting federal investigators." "I made a call to independent counsel before I knew I was going to be contacting federal investigators. I made it when a photograph of my son showed up under my door." Another pause, different in quality. "I understand," Reyes said. "Send me the files." The image is transmitted at 11:43 a.m. Amina watched the send confirmation appear on screen and felt absolutely nothing for approximately 5 seconds, and then felt everything in a rush that she did not have time for and pushed back down to a place she would deal with later. She transmitted to the journalist's second, two reporters, one at a national paper, one at an independent investigative outlet, both of whose work she had spent 20 minutes reading on her phone while Tai Hyan and his attorney exchanged encrypted messages. She had asked Tae-hyun for 3 names and vetted all 3 before choosing 2. He had watched her do this without comment, which was the appropriate response. The third transmission went to Tae-hyun's lead attorney, a woman named Han, who was already in communication with a separate legal team in Seoul. By 12:31 p.m., the photograph of a document that had been sitting in an encrypted folder on a cracked iPhone for 3.5 years existed simultaneously in the possession of a federal agent, 2 journalists, and an international legal team. The compressed, suspended thing that Amina had carried without consciously acknowledging its weight had been released into the world, and there was nothing. Not Baek Sung-jae, not the Kong organization, not anyone with money or authority or the willingness to use both. That could put it back. She set both phones down on the table. Tae-hyun was watching her from across the kitchen. "It's done," she said. He nodded. She picked up her coffee, which had been cold for an hour, and drank it anyway. She needed the motion of it, something to do with her hands. Tae-hyun's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his expression changed in the specific way that faces changed when something you had been half expecting arrived anyway and was still worse than you'd prepared for. He answered. She watched his face during the call. The call lasted 90 seconds. He said almost nothing, 3 words at most, twice, in Korean. When he ended it, he put the phone down on the counter with a deliberateness that was the controlled version of something that wanted to be much less controlled. "That was Sung-jae," he said. She waited. "He knows the files have moved. He has someone inside Reyes's communication chain." He looked at her. He knew within minutes. The cold coffee was still in her hand. She set it down. "That's not possible that fast. It's possible if the contact inside is at the right level." His jaw was tight. He said, he stopped. "Tell me." He said he doesn't need the files anymore. He said the files moving was actually what he wanted. Tae-hyun looked at her with an expression she had no existing category for. "He said to tell you that you've just done exactly what he needed you to do." The kitchen was very quiet. Amina's brain ran through it fast, the way it ran through things when the stakes were high enough. Not sequentially, but in parallel, multiple threads simultaneously, looking for the shape of what she was missing. The transmissions. The timing. Sung-jae landing 40 minutes before they knew about it. His man at the daycare, showing up early, not to take Marcus, but to establish that he could. The photograph under the door. The courtesy call. None of it had been panic. None of it had been the scrambling of a man afraid of exposure. It had been sequencing. "He wanted the files to move," she said slowly. "Yes. Beyond him because as long as I held them, they were leverage he couldn't control. But once they move," she felt it click into place like a key in a lock, the sick geometric certainty of being outmaneuvered. "Once they move to Reyes opens an official investigation. An official investigation creates a formal record of everything connected to Kang Holdings. Not just Sung-jae's fraud, everything. Your father's involvement, the full financial architecture of the organization. The investigation doesn't stop at Sung-jae. It goes through him and takes the whole structure with it." Tae-hyun said nothing, which meant she was right. "He's not trying to survive the investigation," she said. "He's using it. He takes down your entire family with it, and in the chaos of the organization collapsing, he walks away with the 40 million and whatever else he's built separately, and the Kong name absorbs everything." She looked at Tae-hyun. "He doesn't need to suppress the evidence anymore. The evidence is his exit strategy." The silence that followed was the worst kind. The kind that confirmed something. Tae-hyun pulled out a chair and sat down. She had seen him sit down like that once before, in Chicago, after a late meeting that had gone badly in a way neither of them had discussed fully. The posture of a man who needed 30 seconds to put himself back together. She gave him the 30 seconds. "Is there a version of what Reyes is opening," she said, when the 30 seconds had passed, "that separates Sung-jae's crimes from your father's structure? Legally, is there a viable argument? Possibly, if my father cooperates completely. If the attorney's case is strong enough. If Reyes is willing to structure the investigation in a way that targets Sungjae specifically and treats the organization's cooperation as mitigation. He looked up. It's not impossible, but it requires my father to be on the right side of it from this moment forward. No equivocation, no protection of the structure over the truth. And he came to Savannah with Sungjae. Yes. So either he's still protecting Sungjae, or Sungjae has something on him that's worse than what we know about, or... She stopped. Or he came here to stop Sungjae himself, Taehyun said, and he didn't tell me because he didn't trust me not to interfere. She stared at him. Is that possible? I don't know what my father is capable of anymore. I thought I did. The admission cost him something. She could see it in the way he said it, flat and without self-pity, which was worse than self-pity would have been. I believed him 2 months ago when he told me about your mother. I believed he was choosing a different direction. I may have needed that to be true in a way that affected my judgment. Amina sat down across from him. The kitchen light was flat and even. Outside, the Savannah afternoon was going about its business, completely indifferent. We need to know which version it is, she said. Before Reyes moves, before the journalists publish, before any of this becomes irreversible. We need to know whether your father is Sungjae's ally in this room or a variable we can work with. The only way to know is to talk to him. Then we talk to him. Sungjae will be with him. Then we talk to both of them. She said it with a flatness she wasn't entirely feeling but needed to project, because the alternative, the version of herself that acknowledged how exposed they were right now, how precisely Sungjae had anticipated every move, was not useful. You said your organization has people in Savannah. How many? 6, plus Seo and Yoon. How many does Sungjae have? Unknown. Minimum 4, based on what we've observed. He won't move against us in public. He needs this to look like a business resolution, not... She stopped herself from finishing the sentence the way it wanted to finish. He'll want a meeting. He'll frame it as a last attempt at negotiation. Taehyun looked at her. You want to let him frame it that way? I want to be in the room, she said, not behind a door while men decide what happens to me and my son and my mother's legacy. In the room, at the table. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, but a recognition, like something he'd expected arriving slightly ahead of schedule. Sungjae won't accept that. Then Sungjae doesn't get a meeting. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Go Amep. They reached the meeting point at 3 p.m. Sungjae had chosen a private dining room at a restaurant in the historic district, the kind of establishment that rented its back rooms for situations that required discretion without raising flags. Neutral ground in the way that all ground in Savannah was technically neutral, but none of the ground in this situation actually was. Amina had changed into the spare clothes she kept in her office bag, dark jeans, a structured jacket, flat shoes she could move in. She had her current phone in her right jacket pocket and the old phone in her left. She had told Taehyun once, clearly, that if anything happened to Marcus while she was in this room, she would not be responsible for what she did next. And he had told her, with equal clarity, that nothing was going to happen to Marcus, and that Yoon had a second person with her now, and that Seo had eyes on the street outside this building. She had noted all of this and walked into the restaurant anyway. Baek Sung-jae was not what she had expected, which was its own kind of information. She had built him, over years, into a shape that fit the size of what he'd done. Something imposing, something with the physical register of consequence. He was instead a compact man in his mid-50s with a neat gray suit and the unremarkable face of someone who had spent a career being underestimated. He was seated at the far end of the table with a glass of water and the expression of a man who had already decided how this room ended. Beside him, in the chair to his left, was Kang Cheol-soo. Amina had never seen Taehyun's father in person. She had seen photographs, a formidable man in his mid-70s, the kind of face that had been severe before age made it more so. He was thinner in person, and the severity had something else mixed into it now, something she might have called exhaustion. If exhaustion was something she was willing to see in a man responsible for her mother's death. She sat down. Taehyun sat beside her. Neither of them spoke first. Sung-jae looked at Amina with the particular attention of someone who had thought about her in abstract terms for years and was now adjusting for the reality. "Ms. Brooks," he said. His English was precise, slightly formal. "I want you to understand that nothing about this situation required it to become personal. You sent someone to my son's daycare gate," she said. "Define personal." He tilted his head slightly. the way someone did when they were accepting a fair point. A miscalculation in method, not in intention. I wanted your attention, not your fear. You have both. Move on. Sung Jae smiled. It was a small, contained expression. The files you transmitted this morning. You believe they've solved your problem. They haven't. What they've done is open an investigation that will consume the Kang organization entirely, including Tae Hyun's legitimate holdings, including everything he has built in the last decade that is genuinely clean. He glanced at Tae Hyun. You're going to lose the company. You understand that. I understand the risk, Tae Hyun said. It isn't a risk, it's a certainty. Reyes doesn't have the mandate or the inclination to surgically remove my activities from the larger structure. He has a RICO framework and evidence of organized financial crime. He will use them comprehensively. Sung Jae folded his hands on the table. What I'm offering is a controlled alternative. I will provide a full and complete account of my activities to an independent arbiter, not federal investigators, not journalists, an account that fully exonerates the Kang organization and confines criminal liability entirely to myself and my network. In exchange, the files are withdrawn. They can't be withdrawn, Amina said. They've been transmitted. Journalists hold stories. They don't publish without confirmation they've judged sufficient. A credible withdrawal from the source, accompanied by an alternative account, delays publication indefinitely. He looked at her steadily. Reyes is more complicated, but Reyes has a career. Investigators who pursue high-profile cases that collapse in credibility become cautionary examples. He will weigh that. The room was very still. She could hear the restaurant beyond the closed door, the muffled sounds of an ordinary Thursday afternoon in a city that didn't know this conversation was happening. Amina looked at Kang Cheol-soo, who had not yet spoken. The old man was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read, but that had something in it. Not apology, not guilt exactly, but the heavy, specific look of a man sitting with the accumulated weight of decisions made over decades. Say something, she said to him directly. The old man's eyes moved to her without any indication of surprise at being addressed. His English was slower than his son's, more deliberate. Your mother, he said. She came to me first, before she went elsewhere. She came to me and told me what she had found. He stopped. I told her I would handle it. The table was very quiet. You told her to trust the organization, Amina said. Yes. And then Sung Jae had her killed. I did not order it. The words came with force, the specific force of something that had been carried a long time. I did not know he had acted until after. When I learned, he stopped again. His hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. I made a choice to protect the organization. I have carried that choice. She had a 4-year-old daughter, Amina said. The old man looked at her. I know. You knew about me. I knew about you. Something cold moved through her. Not anger, though anger was present. Something older and more structural than anger. She had been known. She had been a fact in the accounting of this man's choices for 29 years. A variable he had weighed and found acceptable to carry without acting on. She had grown up in the absence her mother's death made and built a life from the materials available and come to Savannah and built something real, and all of it, every ordinary morning, every school pickup, every cup of coffee in the office she made herself, had existed in a world where this man knew her name. She became aware that her hands were very still on the table. She made a point of keeping them that way. Here's what I know, she said, and her voice was the steadiest it had been all day. The files are out. You cannot retrieve them. You can delay publication. Possibly, not indefinitely, and not without cost to your credibility with the sources you're delaying. You can pressure Reyes, possibly, but federal investigators who close cases under external pressure have careers that end in specific and public ways, and Reyes has been in the Bureau long enough to know that. What you cannot do is make this disappear. That option closed at 11:43 this morning. Sung Jae's expression had not changed. Then we're in a mutual destruction scenario. No, she said. You're in a destruction scenario. I'm in an exposure scenario. Those are different things. She looked at him. I didn't build a criminal empire. I took a photograph of a piece of paper. Everything that happens to me as a result of this investigation is manageable. Everything that happens to you is not. The door to the private dining room opened. Amina did not look at it. She kept her eyes on Sung Jae and watched his expression do the thing that expressions did when something entered a room that changed the calculation. She watched it happen in his face. the small, precise rearrangement of a man encountering a variable he hadn't fully accounted for. And only then did she turn. Agent Reyes was not what she had pictured from the phone call. He was tall, mid-40s, the particular brand of tired that came from doing complicated work for a long time. Behind him were two other individuals, suits, the specific cut and posture of federal presence. Beside Reyes, slightly to his right, was a woman Amina recognized from 30 minutes of research this morning. One of the journalists, the one from the investigative outlet, who had apparently been in Savannah for reasons that had nothing to do with this situation and everything to do with how quickly a story moved when it arrived with complete documentation. Sung-jae looked at Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun said, "I called Reyes from the car. I told him the meeting location." His voice was even. "I told him to come." Sung-jae looked back at Amina. Something in his face had shifted in a way that was different from all the previous shifts. Not recalculation, not the absorption of a setback. Something underneath all of that. Something she recognized because she had felt it herself this morning, standing in Miss Della's hallway with a photograph in her hand. The understanding that the ground you built everything on was not ground. "You said you'd withdrawn the journalist contact," Sung-jae said to Tae-hyun. His voice had not changed in volume or tone, which was somehow more disturbing than if it had. "I lied," Tae-hyun said. Reyes came to the table. He did not look at anyone other than Sung-jae. He set a folder on the table, thin, 3 pages visible at the top, and said in the completely neutral tone of someone performing a procedural action, "Mr. Baek, we have some questions we'd like you to answer. I'd suggest you consider your options before you respond to any of them." Sung-jae did not look at the folder. He looked at Amina. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't, but you are." He looked at her for a long moment with the specific expression of a man revising his understanding of who he had been dealing with. Then Reyes said his name again, with slightly more weight, and Sung-jae turned his attention away from her for the first time since she had walked into this room. It was in that moment, in the 3 seconds of Sung-jae's redirected attention, that Kang Cheol-soo reached across the table and placed his hand over Amina's. She looked down at it, an old man's hand, the specific weight of decades in it. "There is a document," he said quietly, for her alone, "in my possession. Signed, notarized, filed with an independent legal office in Seoul 3 weeks ago. It names Baek Sung-jae as solely responsible for the murder of Diane Brooks." He paused. "It also names me as the man who knew and did not act. I did not tell Tae-hyun. I did not tell anyone." His hand was still on hers. "Your mother deserved a witness. It is late. I know it is late." Amina looked at the old man's face. She did not forgive him. She was not capable of forgiveness in this moment, and she was not going to perform it. What she felt instead was something more complicated. The sensation of a structure she had lived inside her whole life. The structure of not knowing, beginning very slowly to dissolve. She pulled her hand back. Not roughly, just back into her own space, where it belonged. Reyes was reading Sung-jae his rights in the flat procedural cadence of someone who had done this enough times that the words had become architecture rather than language. One of the suited agents had moved around the table. The journalist, a woman named Caldwell, whose byline Amina had read 3 times this morning in 30 minutes of research, was standing near the wall with her phone in her hand, recording, which was her right and which Sung-jae's attorney, materializing from somewhere near the door, was already attempting to object to in overlapping legal language that Caldwell was ignoring with the practiced ease of someone who had been objected to before. Sung-jae stood when the agent indicated he should stand. He did it without resistance, which was somehow the most unsettling thing he had done in the last 40 minutes. The absolute composure of a man who had more moves remaining and was not concerned about the current one. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Tae-hyun once, briefly, with an expression that communicated nothing specific and everything general, and then he was walked toward the door and through it, and the restaurant beyond swallowed the sound of it. The room felt different with him gone. Smaller, somehow, and at the same time less pressurized, the way a room felt after something that had been building for a long time finally discharged. Reyes turned to the table. His eyes went to Amina first, then Tae-hyun, then the old man. "Mr. Kang," he said to Cheol-soo, "we'll need to speak with you separately." A pause. "Today." Cheol-soo nodded. He looked at Tae-hyun across the table. Tae-hyun looked back at his father with the expression of a man who had rearranged something fundamental inside himself in the last 10 minutes and was still finding where the pieces settled. I'll be available, Cheol-su said to Reyes. Then to Tae-hyun, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. In Korean, quietly. Tae-hyun said nothing. Amina stood up. Her legs were steady. She was aware of being very tired in the specific way that arrived after adrenaline had done its work and left the bill. A bone-level fatigue that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the sustained effort of being fully present inside an unbearable situation for 7 hours straight. She was aware of wanting, with the intensity of a physical need, to see Marcus. I need to go, she said to no one in particular. Reyes said, Ms. Brooks, we'll need a formal statement. I know. Schedule it through my attorney. She gave him the name. Today is not available. He looked at her with the assessing look of a federal agent determining whether a witness was a flight risk. She looked back at him with the look of a woman who had not slept enough and had a 3-year-old son waiting for her and had exactly zero interest in being assessed. Tomorrow morning, he said. Fine. She picked up her bag and walked out of the private dining room, through the restaurant, past tables of people eating lunch in the ordinary afternoon of a city that had no idea what had just happened in its historic district, and out through the front door into the October light. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed. She was 2 blocks from the safe house when Seo called. She answered before the first ring had finished. Ms. Brooks. His voice had the particular flat quality of someone controlling information delivery. You need to come directly. Everyone is fine. Marcus is fine. A pause that she could have done without. But there's a situation. What situation? Sungjae's contractor. The one from this morning. The man with the scar. He came to the house approximately 15 minutes ago. He didn't come alone. She was already walking faster. What did he do? He knocked on the door. He told Yoon he had a message for you. When she told him to leave, he said... Seo paused again. He said that Mr. Baek had anticipated this outcome and had made arrangements. He said you would understand what that meant. Amina was running. She registered the decision to run the way she registered most physical things in extreme moments. As a fact, not a choice, her body ahead of the words for it. The pavement under her shoes, the gap between her and the corner, the specific irrelevance of what she looked like to the afternoon pedestrians she was moving past. She was running and she was also thinking because she was not someone who stopped thinking when she moved. And what she was thinking was, arrangements meant contingency, and contingency meant Sungjae had prepared for arrest, and preparation meant something was already in motion that his arrest hadn't stopped. She hit the corner and turned and could see the house and the porch, and Seo standing outside with his phone still at his ear, and she ran all the way to the front steps. Where is he? She said between 2 breaths. Gone. He left the message and went. He didn't try to enter. Seo looked at her with the careful expression of someone managing multiple pieces of information. Yoon has Marcus in the upstairs room. He's fine. He's been fine the whole time. He's currently explaining to Yoon why Gerald needs a companion frog. She went through the front door and up the stairs and into the room at the end of the hall, and Marcus was sitting on the bed with Yoon, 2 books open between them, the stacking ring in his lap. He looked up when she came in with the expression of someone interrupted mid-important point. Gerald needs a friend, he told her. Okay, she said. She sat down on the edge of the bed and put her hand on his back, and he accepted this without breaking his train of thought, which was the most normal thing that had happened since 6:30 this morning. We'll find Gerald a friend. A green one. Sure. Not orange. Orange ones are bossy. Understood. She looked at Yoon over his head. Yoon gave her a small, clear nod. He's been okay. This is real. Amina kept her hand on Marcus's back and breathed. Tae-hyun arrived 11 minutes later. He came through the door with Seo behind him and went directly to the kitchen, and Amina met him there because the look on his face when he walked in told her that whatever Seo had relayed from the contractor's message, Tae-hyun had received additional information in the time between the restaurant and now. Tell me, she said. He put his phone on the table, screen up. On the screen was a photograph. Not of a person, not of a document. A photograph of a storage unit, a combination padlock, a number stenciled on the corrugated metal door. Sungjae has a secondary archive, Taehyun said. Physical documents, not digital. Stored at a facility 20 minutes from here. The contractor's message was informing you that the archive exists. It contains, according to what we've been able to verify in the last 30 minutes, financial records, communications, and at least 2 sworn depositions. He stopped. She waited. The depositions are from members of my organization, he said, people who reported directly to my father. They described the decision-making around your mother's death, in detail, with names. The room did its quiet thing again. Sung-jae built himself an insurance policy, she said. He built it over years. He knew that if the fraud case went forward, he would need something to negotiate with, something that implicated the Kang family at a level high enough that prosecutorial interest in him would have to be weighed against prosecutorial interest in my father. He looked at her. Those depositions, in Reyes's hands, guarantee my father faces charges, not just cooperation, charges. And Sung-jae told his contractor to tell me about the archive, she said. Not you, me. Yes. Because he knew you'd protect your father. Taehyun's jaw moved. He didn't answer, which was an answer. He wants me to decide whether to tell Reyes about the archive, she said. He's put it in my hands. Either I tell Reyes and your father gets prosecuted, or I don't tell Reyes and the evidence of my mother's murder stays buried in a storage unit and Sung-jae gets to carry it as leverage from prison. She looked at Taehyun. That's what the message was. Yes. He still thinks I'll protect you over the truth about my mother. Something moved across Taehyun's face, raw and briefly uncontrolled. He may think that because... He stopped. Because what? Because I asked him to. The words came out flat and damaged. 2 months ago, when I first understood how serious the situation was, before I knew about the archive, before I knew the full picture, I told him that anything connected to my father needed to be managed internally before it went external. I told him that the organization could absorb the fraud exposure, but not my father's direct criminal liability. He looked at her. I told him I would pay to keep that separation clean. She stared at him. You offered Sung-jae money, she said slowly, to keep your father's role in my mother's death out of any eventual investigation. I didn't know at that point that your mother... You offered him money to bury evidence of a murder. You didn't know whose murder. You knew it was a murder. Her voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the voice of something that had gone past volume. You came here to protect me, and you came here having already bought Sung-jae's silence about a crime your family committed. I came here because the situation changed, because I realized what the archive likely contained, because once I understood your mother's connection... Stop. She held up one hand, not aggressive, just a stop sign, clean and complete. Stop explaining the sequence to me like sequence is what matters right now. He stopped. She turned away from the table. She walked to the window and looked at the yard, at the fence at the back, at the ordinary afternoon light doing its amber thing on a different set of surfaces. She thought about the phone call with Reyes this morning, all the questions she had answered with complete honesty, all the parts of herself she had put on the table without softening. She had told Taehyun, I'm not afraid of what comes out. She had meant it. She was discovering now that meaning something and being prepared for the specific form it arrived in were different categories of readiness. She turned back. I'm going to call Reyes, she said. I'm going to tell him about the archive. Taehyun looked at her. I know. Your father. I know what it means for my father. His voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of something maintained against significant pressure. Do it. She looked at him for a moment, not checking whether he meant it. She could see that he meant it. She was looking at the cost of it in his face, the specific price tag of a decision made correctly about something that was going to hurt, and she was acknowledging that she saw it, even if she couldn't do anything about it. She picked up her phone and called Reyes. The storage facility was a flat-roofed industrial complex on the western edge of the city, the kind of place that existed in every American city, indistinguishable from any other, its anonymity its primary feature. Reyes had 2 vehicles there within 22 minutes of her call, a response time that told her he had already been moving resources into position, which meant he had already known or strongly suspected the archive existed. She did not go inside the facility. This was not her operation, and she knew the difference between being a participant and being a presence that complicated someone else's work. She stood in the parking lot with Taehyun and watched the federal agents move with the particular efficient purpose of people executing something they had prepared for, and she felt the day settling around her like weather after a storm. Still present, still loud, but the quality of the pressure changing. Taehyun stood beside her with his hands in his jacket pockets and said nothing for a long time. She didn't need him to say anything. She was processing, and processing for her had always been a physical and solitary activity even when there were people present. She was processing her mother. She was processing the depositions inside that storage unit that described in detail a decision made 30 years ago by men who weighed her mother's life against organizational continuity and came to the wrong answer. She was processing the fact that this had now been found, that it would now be read by people with the authority to act on it, that the answer those men had come to was finally, 30 years late, being revised. She was not okay. She knew she was not okay. She had been not okay since the photograph appeared under her door this morning, and she would be not okay for a significant period beyond today. And that was the accurate accounting of the situation, and she had never been someone who preferred inaccurate accounting because it was more comfortable. She was also standing. She was standing in a parking lot in the city she had chosen for herself, and she had made every decision that had led to this moment with full knowledge of the cost, and nothing had been taken from her that she had not chosen to put in play. Reyes came out of the facility 40 minutes after going in. He walked to where she was standing and stopped. "It's there," he said. "I assumed. The depositions are detailed." He paused. "Kang Cheol-soo is going to face a very serious conversation tomorrow." "I know." "I want you to know," Reyes said, "that the investigation will be structured to reflect degrees of culpability. The man who ordered the action and the man who failed to stop it are not the same category of defendant." He looked at her. "That distinction matters to how this proceeds." "I understand the distinction," she said. "I want both categories pursued." He looked at her for a moment. The agent assessing witness expression had been replaced by something that was closer to the expression of one person talking to another. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went back to his vehicle. Tae-hyun said quietly beside her, "He called you, ma'am." "I noticed." "You terrify federal agents." "I terrify everyone when I'm tired," she said. "It's the only time I stop managing it." He almost smiled. She saw it. The almost. The compression of something that wanted to be lighter than the day allowed. She did not smile back, but she did not look away either. Her phone buzzed. "Yoon," she answered. "Everything good?" she said. "All quiet," Yoon said. "Marcus has named the second stacking ring Gerald Jr. and has requested a formal ceremony." A pause. "I told him we'd need your approval." Amina closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 full second of her son's voice in her head asking about a green frog, of the specific weight of his small body on her hip running 4 blocks, of the ceramic frog on Miss Della's porch that he greeted every morning with the absolute certainty that it deserved acknowledgement. "Tell him the ceremony is approved," she said. "Tell him I'll be home soon." She ended the call. The parking lot was thinning out around them. Federal vehicles repositioning, agents moving with purpose toward whatever the next procedural step was. The storage facility's fluorescent sign had come on as the afternoon shifted toward evening. The light in Savannah was doing its thing again, amber and indifferent, the same light that had been doing it all day while everything changed. "It's not over," Taehyun said. It wasn't a warning. It was the straightforward acknowledgement of someone who knew exactly what the next phase looked like. "I know. Sungjae has attorneys. This process is going to be long and public, and there will be parts of it that are hard." "I know that too. My father's legal situation." "Taehyun." She looked at him. "I know. I've known since this morning what today was going to cost and what the next year is going to look like. I'm not asking you to protect me from any of it. I'm asking you to not treat me like someone who needs the reality explained to them slowly." He looked at her. "Old habit. Break it." A long pause. The parking lot. The amber light. The sound of Savannah doing its ordinary thing around the edges of an extraordinary day. "My organization," he said slowly, "is going to need to change. Comprehensively. Not as a legal strategy. Actually." He looked at the storage facility. "I've been building toward it for 3 years. Trying to. It's harder from the inside than it looks from the outside. There are people who depend on the current structure. People who don't have anywhere else to go if the structure changes." He paused. "I'm telling you this not as an excuse, as a fact of what the next period looks like." "Why are you telling me?" He turned and looked at her directly, not strategically, not with the controlled professional attention she had spent 18 months learning to read at Kang Holdings, with the specific quality of honesty that had always been somewhere underneath the rest of it, the version of him she had seen in an empty Wicker Park building that smelled like old wood and new paint, the version she had stopped believing existed after a half-heard phone call on a Thursday night. "Because you're the only person I've told the truth to consistently enough today that I want to keep doing it," he said. She looked at him. The day had been too long and too full, and she was too tired for the kind of careful management she would normally apply to a moment like this one. She didn't have the reserves for it. What she had instead was the stripped-down version, just the truth of what she was standing next to, the assessment made without the protective layering she had spent 3 years building. "You lied to me," she said. "The offer you made Sung Jae? The thing you asked him to bury?" "Yes. Before you knew it was my mother." "Yes." "That's not a small thing." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at the facility. Somewhere in there, in boxes and envelopes and the specific physical weight of paper documents, was the evidence of her mother's courage and her mother's death and the 30 years of institutional silence that had followed both. Someone had finally opened the door on it. That someone was her. "I'm going to go be with my son," she said. "I know. Tomorrow, I give my statement to Reyes. The day after I reopen my office, because I have a Henderson walkthrough that's been rescheduled twice and a fabric rep who deserves a call back and an assistant I've been putting off hiring for 8 months." She looked at Tae-hyun. "My life is not going on hold for this process. Whatever the investigation requires of me, I will provide on my schedule through my attorney. Everything else continues." "Of course. And you," she said, "are not going to make decisions about what I know and what I don't know based on what you think I can handle. If something is happening that affects me or Marcus, I hear it directly. No filters. No managed versions." He held her gaze. "Agreed. We're not—" She stopped because there wasn't a clean sentence for what they weren't. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. The architecture of trust, once it had been damaged, did not rebuild on the same timeline as its original construction, and she was not going to pretend otherwise to make the moment easier. "This doesn't go back to what it was." "I know. If it becomes something different." "Yes. I'm not saying yes to that. I'm saying I know it's possible." She picked up her bag. "That's not nothing. Right now it's what I have." She started walking toward the street. She had made it 6 steps when his voice came from behind her, quiet and without performance. "Amina." She didn't stop walking, but she listened. "She would have been proud of you," he said. "Your mother. What you did with that photograph, what you did today, she would have—" "Don't," she said. Not harsh, just a stop. "I don't need that." She kept walking. "I know what she would have been. I don't need someone to hand it to me." She walked to the end of the parking lot and turned toward the street and kept going, the amber light on her face, the city around her doing its indifferent, beautiful thing. 3 years of a life she built from nothing, waiting for her 4 blocks away in the form of a small boy who needed a green frog and had strong opinions about the color orange and greeted ceramic garden animals by name, every morning as if acknowledgement were a thing you owed the world simply for being there at all. She was halfway down the block when she heard the second car. Not Taehyun's, not a federal vehicle. She knew the sound of those now, the particular engine weight of government-issue transportation. This was different. It came from the cross street, moving slowly, without urgency, which was the thing that caught her attention. Urgency was normal. Slowness was a choice. She stopped walking. The car pulled to the curb 20 feet ahead of her. Black sedan, not the same one from her office block, but the same category of vehicle, the same deliberate stillness after the engine cut. She stood on the sidewalk with her bag over one shoulder and the amber light on her face and looked at it. The door opened. The man who got out was not one of Sung Jae's contractors. He was older, Korean, the specific physical type of someone who had spent decades in physical work without it becoming his identity. He was wearing a plain dark jacket. He was holding a manila envelope. He walked toward her and stopped at a respectful distance and held the envelope out without preamble. "From Mr. Baek," he said. In English, carefully pronounced. "He said to tell you this was always going to be yours." She looked at the envelope. She did not take it immediately. "What is it?" "I don't know the contents." He kept holding it. "He said you would." She took it. He went back to the car and it pulled away and was gone. She stood on the sidewalk with the envelope in her hand and the city doing its thing around her. And she thought about opening it here, in the diminishing light, on a street she didn't know well. Then she thought about Sung Jae in federal custody, being processed through the specific machinery of that situation. She thought about a man who had, even in arrest, managed to send her something he wanted her to have before it was taken. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. Old, the color palette of film photography from the early 90s, the slight blurring at the edges of the frame that came from a camera that wasn't quite right or a photographer who wasn't quite still. It showed a woman, young, perhaps 28, with a wide-set face and the specific quality of composure that Amina recognized the way you recognized a landscape you had never visited but had studied in photographs. Sitting at a desk, papers in front of her, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not a smile and not severity, but something in between. The expression of someone who knew the picture was being taken and had decided to look at it honestly. On the back, in handwriting she did not recognize, Diane Brooks, October 1995, Kang Holdings, Chicago office. Her mother, 2 months before she died. Amina stood on the sidewalk in Savannah and looked at her mother's face for the first time in a photograph that was not a formal portrait, not a document of a dead woman, but a living moment, a Tuesday afternoon in an office, a woman at work, existing fully in a world that had not yet decided to end her. She stood there for a long time. Then she put the photograph carefully back in the envelope, put the envelope in her bag, and walked the rest of the way to the safe house. The next 6 weeks were not a resolution. They were work. Amina gave her statement to Reyes on Friday morning, 2 hours, every detail in order, her attorney present throughout. Reyes asked his questions with the careful precision of someone building a structure that needed to hold significant legal weight, and she answered them the same way. When it was done, her attorney, a tall, direct woman named Cheryl, who had been Amina's lawyer since the first year in Savannah, and who had received the standby call Thursday morning without batting an eye, walked her out of the federal building and told her she'd done well. "I told the truth," Amina said. "That's all that's done well." "In this context," Cheryl said, "those are the same thing." The Henderson walkthrough happened the following Tuesday. The client, a retired couple converting a Midtown Victorian into their permanent residence, had been patient about the reschedule in the way that clients with good instincts were patient, without pressing for explanations that weren't offered. Amina walked through their house with her sight notebook and her eye for the particular relationship between light and space and what people actually needed from rooms they intended to inhabit for the rest of their lives. And she felt herself re-entering the work the way you re-entered a room after the windows had been opened. The same space, slightly different air. She hired an assistant. Her name was Priya, 24, sharp and quietly funny, with the particular kind of professional discretion that Amina valued above most other qualities in people she worked alongside. On Priya's second day, she asked no questions about the 2 weeks of rescheduled appointments and the unusual security camera that had appeared outside the townhouse. Amina noted this approvingly and gave her a raise 3 weeks later. Deja, who had been with Amina long enough to understand that certain things resolved themselves without requiring comment, simply returned to normal operations on the Monday following everything and did not bring it up, which was an act of professional care that Amina acknowledged by finally approving the ergonomic chair Deja had been requesting for 4 months. The investigation moved at the pace of federal investigations, which was to say it moved with the lumbering, unstoppable momentum of institutional machinery once properly engaged. Sungjae's attorneys were formidable. They were not formidable enough. The photograph from Amina's phone, corroborated by the physical archive documents, the depositions, and the financial forensics that Reyes's team assembled over the following weeks, constructed a case that Sungjae's legal team challenged at every available procedural point and lost at each one. Caldwell's piece ran in the investigative outlet 6 days after the arrest, sourced carefully, legally bulletproofed. The national paper followed 4 days after that. The coverage was extensive and not gentle, and Amina read every word of it in her office at 7 a.m. before Marcus woke up, and felt something that was not satisfaction exactly, but was close to the clean feeling of a thing being named correctly after a long time of being unnamed. Kang Cheol-soo was indicted on charges related to obstruction and accessory liability in the death of Diane Brooks. His attorneys negotiated extensively. The final arrangement, full cooperation, complete testimony against Sungjae, significant financial restitution to a victim's fund, spared him a trial but not accountability. He was publicly named. His role was publicly documented. The record existed. Amina's attorney made certain of that last part specifically, and the language of the arrangement reflected it in terms that could not be revised or expunged. She was asked by Reyes's team whether she found the arrangement acceptable. She thought about it for a full 24 hours before answering. "Acceptable isn't the word," she said. "It's accurate. That's what I asked for. That's what I got." Tae-hyun stayed in Savannah. This was not a dramatic announcement. It was a sequence of practical decisions that accumulated into a fact. He extended his initial rental. He found a longer-term property. He established a working arrangement with his American legal team that could be maintained from Georgia rather than Chicago. He did not present any of this to Amina as a statement or a bid. He simply stayed and was present in the city and called when he had information relevant to the investigation and did not call when he didn't. She ran into him at a coffee place on Drayton Street on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after everything. He was ahead of her in line. He turned when he heard her voice at the door, not startled, not performing surprise, just turning, and said good morning and asked if she'd heard from Cheryl about the latest filing. And she said yes, and they stood in line together and got their coffees and stood outside in the October turning November air for 20 minutes, talking about the investigation and about Marcus and about a property the real estate division was looking at in Atlanta that he thought was a bad bet and she agreed with, and at the end of it he said he'd see her later and she said yes, and they went their separate ways. This happened 3 more times before it stopped being accidental. She didn't examine it too closely. She was not ready to examine it too closely, and she knew the difference between not ready and not willing, and she was honest with herself about which category she was in. She was in not ready. The willing was a fact she was sitting beside without acting on, the way you sat beside a window on a cold morning, aware of the light, not opening it yet. Marcus saw him on a Saturday in November. She had not planned this. Taehyun had stopped by the townhouse to drop off documents from Cheryl that he'd picked up while passing her office. A coincidence of logistics, nothing arranged. Marcus was on the front steps examining a beetle with the focused intensity of a scientist who had just discovered a significant finding. Taehyun came up the front walk and saw Marcus and stopped. And Marcus looked up from the beetle and said, without preamble, "You're the tall one." "Yes," Taehyun said. "Did you find a green frog?" "I haven't looked yet." Marcus considered this. "You should look," he said. "Gerald needs a friend." He held out the beetle. "Do you want to see this?" Taehyun crouched down, not the performed crouch of an adult managing a child, but actually crouching, going all the way to Marcus's level, and looked at the beetle with the same quality of attention he gave everything. "That's a ground beetle," he said. "They're fast." "This one is slow," Marcus said. "Maybe he's tired." "From what?" "Ground beetles work at night," Taehyun said. "Looking for food. If he's out during the day, he probably had a long night." Marcus absorbed this. He looked at the beetle with revised understanding and then looked at Taehyun with the specific expression he used when he was deciding whether someone was a credible source. "Do you know a lot about beetles?" "Not really." "A little." "Okay," Marcus said, apparently satisfied with the honesty of this, and returned his attention to the beetle. Amina stood in the doorway and watched this and did not say anything for a moment. The morning light was the particular clear November light that had none of October's amber heaviness, cleaner and more direct. Taehyun glanced up at her briefly from his crouch and then back at the beetle, giving her the space of it, not making the moment carry more than it was. She went inside to get the documents he'd brought. When she came back out, Marcus had moved on to a different section of the front walk and Taehyun was standing, and he took the receipt she handed him and their fingers didn't touch, which she noticed and which seemed like the right amount of distance for November. "He has your focus," he said quietly, meaning Marcus. "The way he looks at things." "He has his own focus," she said. "It's his." Taehyun looked at her. "Yes," he said. "You're right." She looked at him, looking at Marcus from a distance, and she thought about the photograph in her bag, the one Sungjae had sent, the one of her mother at a desk in 1995 looking directly at the camera. She had put it in a frame. It was in her bedroom on the dresser, not displayed publicly, not hidden, just present. Her mother's face, honest and composed, at work in a world that had 30 years of consequences still ahead of it. She thought about what it meant that a man who had built his entire career on leverage had chosen, in his last free hour, to send that photograph to her rather than keep it. She had thought about it a dozen times and come to different answers each time, and she had finally decided that the answer was not the point. The photograph was the point. It existed. She had it. Her mother was in it, alive and working and present, and that was not nothing. After 29 years of an absence shaped like an accident, it was the specific shape of something. "He's going to want to know," she said to Taehyun, still watching Marcus. "Eventually, kids ask. He'll want to know where he came from, who his father is." She paused. "I'm not going to lie to him." "I know." That means it has to be true, she said. What we tell him has to be the truth. Which means there can't be a version you perform for him and a version you actually are. He's 3. He'll figure it out by the time he's 7. He has my focus. Taehyun was quiet for a moment. What does that look like? It looks like you being here. Consistently. Not dramatically. Not in ways that require him to adjust his whole understanding of the world on a given Tuesday. Just here. She looked at Taehyun. Can you do that without making it about what you need from it? He held her gaze. I'm going to try, he said. I can't promise I'll always get it right. I can tell you it's the thing I most want to get right. She accepted this. Not with warmth exactly, not yet, but with the acknowledgement of its accuracy. He was not promising her a version of himself he hadn't earned the right to promise. He was telling her what he was working toward. She had enough respect for honesty to receive it without asking for more than it was. Marcus, she called. He looked up. Come tell Taehyun goodbye. He has to go. Marcus came up the walk with the ground beetle cupped in his hands. He looked at Taehyun with the solemn authority of someone completing a protocol. You should go look for a green frog, he said. I will, Taehyun said. Today, Marcus said, because he was not a child who accepted vague timelines. Today, Taehyun agreed. Marcus nodded, satisfied, and released the beetle carefully onto the porch railing. He watched it for a moment to make sure it had successfully transitioned, then went inside past Amina's legs with the focused energy of a person who had other things to attend to. Taehyun looked at Amina. She looked back at him. The November light between them. The city sounds at the edges. The ordinary Saturday morning of a life she had built from nothing and intended to keep. Go find the frog, she said. He almost smiled again. This time she let herself see it fully. The real version, the one that had nothing managed in it. And she filed it in the category of things that were true without requiring her to act on them immediately. He went down the front walk. She watched him reach the sidewalk and turn and go, and she stood in her doorway in her city in the clean November light and breathed. The trial of Baek Sung-jae began the following spring. Amina did not attend. She gave her testimony via pre-recorded deposition, worked from home on the day it was read in court, and checked the news once in the evening to confirm the proceedings had gone as expected. They had. She made dinner, burned the rice slightly because she was reading a client proposal while it cooked, salvaged it with butter, and called it intentional, and ate with Marcus at the kitchen table while he explained at length why ground beetles were actually very interesting, and maybe the most interesting thing. She agreed that they were very interesting. She called her attorney afterward, got a 2-sentence update, said thank you, and went to bed. The conviction came 4 months later. Sung-jae received 18 years on the federal charges, with additional state-level proceedings still ongoing. His criminal network, operating on the assumption of his continued direction, had begun fragmenting within weeks of his arrest. The specific kind of organizational collapse that happened when the structure had been built around one person's authority rather than any sustainable architecture. The $43 million in diverted funds, the final accounting, larger than the initial estimate, was the subject of a separate civil action that would take years to resolve. Amina followed the coverage for approximately 2 weeks. Then she stopped following it because the story had completed the part that was hers to follow, and the rest of it was institutional process that would continue with or without her attention, and her attention was more usefully directed at the Harrison Project, which was running behind on tile samples, and at Marcus's pediatric dentist appointment, which she had successfully stopped postponing, and at the conversation with Priya about expanding the studio's portfolio into commercial properties, which was overdue and which she was genuinely excited about. She was genuinely excited about her work. This was not a small thing. She had built something real, and it was still real, and it had survived the week in October when everything tried to take it apart, and she was not going to be modest about what that meant. She framed her mother's photograph properly in December. Not the dresser. The living room, on the wall near the window where the light hit it well. She spent a Saturday afternoon getting the height right, driving Marcus to the hardware store for the right anchor, listening to him explain his opinions about wall colors with the authoritative confidence of a child whose mother was an interior designer and who had absorbed a significant amount of ambient professional knowledge. When she finally got it level and stepped back, Marcus stood beside her and looked at the photograph with his hands on his hips, assessing. "Who's that?" he said. "Her name was Diane," Amina said. "She was brave and she was smart and she worked very hard." She paused. "She was my mother." Marcus looked at the photograph for a moment. Like you're my mother? Like that. He nodded. He reached up and took Amina's hand, not looking away from the photograph, the gesture of a child performing the instinctive calculus of love, presence offered as response to the presence of something serious. She felt his small fingers in hers and looked at her mother's face, looking directly at a camera in 1995 with the composed, honest expression of a woman who knew the picture was being taken and had decided not to look away. She had not looked away either. That was the inheritance, not the tragedy of how it ended, but the composure of how Diane Brooks had looked at the world while she was in it, directly, with clear eyes, without the softening of pretense. Amina had spent a long time thinking that the primary thing her mother left her was an absence. She understood now that the absence had always had a shape, and the shape had always been this. Look at the thing directly, name it accurately. Hold on to what you know is true when the pressure to let go of it is significant. Put the evidence somewhere safe and don't forget why you kept it. She squeezed Marcus's hand. He squeezed back, already moving on, already turning toward the pile of stacking rings that had migrated from the bedroom to the living room in the way of objects belonging to small children, already building toward whatever the afternoon had in it, already fully and completely in the present tense, in the way that children were before the world taught them to live otherwise. She let him go and looked at her mother for one more moment. Then she went to make coffee, because the afternoon was her own, and the light was good, and she had a proposal to finish, and a life to get on with. Not a rescued life, not a restored life, but the one she had made with her own hands from the materials available, which was the only kind that had ever been worth having. Outside, the Savannah light did its thing. It was not amber today. It was the clear, flat, honest light of a new season, coming through the windows without flattery, illuminating the room exactly as it was, which was enough, which had always been enough.